So yesterday I did a video concerning the Amish, Mennonite, and Hutterite, their past, their history, and how they were persecuted alongside the Jews for their beliefs, also for keeping the Sabbath, which they did. And in the view of the Constantine Christian world, this was unacceptable. So they were persecuted along with the Jews. So I felt it was necessary to give them a message of hope concerning their past. But now, today, what I'm going to do, this is going to be a warning message, especially to the Mennonites, but not just the Mennonites, but to the Hutterites and the Amish, which are also a branch of Mennonites. What am I talking about? I'm talking about how at least two of the branches, the Amish and the Mennonite. I don't know much about the Hutterite, so I cannot speak very much on that. I can go and look up Hutterite Sunday versus Sabbath. I can do that right now. Yep, they do Sunday, the same stuff as the Constantinism people do. But once again, pacifists, like the Mennonite and the Amish. Now, here's what I'm getting at. The switching from the Sabbath to Sunday actually did happen with the Amish, Mennonite, and Hutterite. And it happened, the reason why it happened was because it was a threat on the pain of death. But the problem is with doing so is it now puts you in opposition to the elect, the Jews. Yes, it does. It makes you an enemy of the Jews when you switch from Sabbath to Sunday worship. It's Constantinism. Constantine was a murderer, and he passed this trait to his followers from generation to generation to generation to this day. And one of the traditions that he did was he caused the church, it is a documented fact, to switch from Sabbath to Sunday. Sunday wasn't just another workday in the Roman Empire. On March 7th, 321, however, Roman Emperor Constantine I issued a civil decree making Sunday a day of rest from labor, stating all judges, city and people, and the craftsmen shall rest upon the venerable day of the sun, thereby making it obviously the day of sun worship. You see, idolatry. The Sunday goes hand in hand with idolatry, worshiping of the sun god. And I will go to another. Uh, this is very interesting how they answer the question. This is on gotquestions.org. Did Constantine change the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday? Answer: in the year 321 AD, Constantine decreed, on the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and the people residing in the cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. You can find this also in the book History of the Church, Volume 3, page 380, note 1. Constantine seems to have made this change himself and not through the papacy. Well, of course, the papacy didn't exist at that time. He was the beginning of it. As it says, since the papacy had not really come into being at that time, the papacy grew gradually out of the office of bishop, and for many years this was centered in Rome. In any case, it should be noted that in doing this, Constantine, listen to how they word this. This is how delusion starts, folks. When you deny what's fact. So they say Constantine is not changing the Sabbath. He is merely making Sunday the official day of rest for the Roman Empire. Now look what they do. Now when they start denying, well, right after this, they start denying the obvious. If the obvious were not true, there would be no point in denying the obvious now, would it? So let's look at the next sentence here. His motivation was probably not born out of hatred of the Jews. It's hard to say for sure why Constantine or any historical figure did what they did, but out of desire to adopt what the Christians had practiced already for nearly 2.5 centuries. Really? And so what they do is they go and take Acts 20 and verse 7 and they pervert it, where it says in his will document that the early church adopted Sunday as the day of worship. No, it's not. They use all kinds of excuses. But the reason why they switched to honor the sun god is out of hatred for the Jews. It's very simple. It is so that they would not be associated with the Jews. Okay? However, when you read Romans 11, how can you do these things to not be associated with the Jews if in verse 11 it says, I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? Jehovah forbid, but rather through their fall, salvation has come to the Gentiles for to provoke Israel to jealousy. Why? To bring them back. Now, to fall of them, the temporary fall of them, be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them, the riches of the Gentile, then how much more their fullness? What does that mean? When the time of the Gentiles come to an end and the time of Israel begins again, but they don't. But Constantine Christianity does not believe that. But to the Mennonites, Hutterites, and the Amish, your forefathers did believe it. They believed it because they did choose the Sabbath over Sunday. When you recognize a Sabbath versus Sunday, it means you are a friend of the Jews. If you choose Sunday over the Sabbath, it means you are an enemy of the Jews. I'll continue. Verse 13, for I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my office. If by any means necessary that I provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, and to save some of them. For if the casting away of them is a reconciling of the world, the Gentile world, how much more shall be the receiving of them, but life from the dead. So he says they're going to come from death back to life. This is Paul speaking. Okay. First fruit is holy, that is Israel's Messiah. Jehovah is also holy, and if the root is holy, so are the branches. So when you go and make Israel your enemy, you also make the Messiah your enemy and call him the Antichrist. That's what you do. Now, what I'm getting at here is verse 17, and if some of the branches, some of them, not all of them, but the Roman church, the Constantine church, claims that all of them are broken off. Some of them are broken off, and you are a wild olive tree. You were grafted in among them, which means you're supposed to get along with them. You're not supposed to be their enemy because you're grafted in among them. You have more in common with the Jews than you have, obviously, with the Jews than you have with Constantine. Okay? And then you partake of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. Do not boast against the branches. What did Constantinism do? Not only did they boast against the branches, they went forth out to murder the branches, to snuff out to try to burn all the branches of Israel. And they rejected Israel's Messiah, Yehoshua, Messiah, and they chose a Greek one, Jesus, false Messiah, out of bigotry, hatred, anti-Semitism, the whole 9 yards. He says, because if you boast, you do not bear the root, but the root bears you. You will say, then the branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Well, because of unbelief, they were broken off, and you stand by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear, for if Jehovah spared not the natural branches when they sinned, be careful, because he will also break you off. Behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of Jehovah on them which fell severity, but toward you goodness, only if you continue in his goodness. Well, I will tell you that the Constantine church, the Constantine group, Gentile Christianity did not continue in goodness. And Paul warned that they were turning away from that even before he died. So, it says, for if you were cut out of the wild olive tree, out of the olive tree which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to the nature of a good olive tree, how much more shall these 12 branches, which are the natural branches, be grafted into? They have a better chance than you, is what he's saying to the Romans, of being grafted back on their rightful place. For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness. In other words, until the time of the Gentiles comes to an end, until their time is done. And when it's done, the next thing happens. And so, verse 26, all Israel shall be saved. Let me repeat myself. All Israel shall be saved, for out of Zion shall come the deliverer, not out of Rome, not out of Salt Lake City, not out of the mountains of Pennsylvania, not out of Rome, not out of Moscow, but out of Zion shall come the deliverer, and shall turn ungodliness away from Jacob. For this is my new covenant, everlasting covenant, as written in Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34, and Hebrews 8, verses 8 through 12, when I shall take away their sins. As concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sakes, but concerning the election, they are the beloved for the patriarch's sakes. Yes, they are the elect after all. Why? Because the gifts and the calling of Jehovah cannot be changed. For you in times past have not believed Jehovah, yet now you have obtained mercy because of their unbelief. Even so, these 12 tribes temporarily were in unbelief so that you might receive mercy. And because you received mercy, he's going to give them mercy back. It says, for Jehovah has concluded all in unbelief, that he might have mercy upon all. And so you see how this works. Once again, the whole point of Sunday worship was to be an enemy of Israel. And to be an enemy of Israel is to be an enemy of Israel's Messiah, the root. To be an enemy of the lump, or the first fruit. In verse 16, it says, for if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy, and if the root be holy, so are the branches. So if you go and make yourself an enemy to the branches, you are also the enemy of the root. And if you are an enemy of the root, then you are an enemy of Jehovah, our Father in heaven. So to the Mennonite, the Hutterite, and the Amish, you slipped away. You slipped towards Constantinism to avoid being murdered. The Jews did not. What happened to you? Your forefathers, did they die in vain? Because they were bludgeoned, murdered, like the Jews were, for the same reason. But now, even some among the Mennonites have joined further in this outrage. Now let's see if I can find it. Here we go. This was back in July 9, 2017. Or on the Hebrew calendar, it was, well, I don't know when it was on the Hebrew calendar. Okay, I want to show you something. Now, I know there are those among the Amish and among the Mennonites who completely disagree with. I understand this, but what I'm saying is this slipping away happens gradually. It does not happen overnight, okay? So though you may not agree with it, it begins with Sunday worship of Constantinism. So the title is, it's on the Jerusalem Post. Mennonites' resolution is anti-Semitic and unwise, legal experts say. the church, encouraged by Palestinian Christians, voted to divest from Israel. The Mennonite Church USA's decision to divest its holding in companies profiting from Israel's presence in the West Bank, which is not the West Bank. It will become part of Israel proper very shortly. Is anti-Semitic at its core, an evangelical litigation expert said. The resolution of the Mennonite Church USA is confusing and contradictory, said Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel and president of Christians in Defense of Israel. Liberty Counsel is an international nonprofit litigation, education, and policy organization dedicated to advancing religious freedom. The church's resolution, voted on last week in Orlando at the biennial National Mennonite Convention, calls to speak out against anti-Semitism, cultivate relationship with Jewish communities in the U.S., and to examine the role that the church played in the Holocaust. To examine the role that the church played in the Holocaust. But the issue that has made the most noise is the directive to the Mennonite Church USA's $3 billion Everence Church Fund. What? For the love for money is the root of every kind of evil, is it not? Paul was right. More slippage into Constantinism, the hoarding of money. Everence Church Fund to ensure that it avoids giving any economic support for Israeli policies in the occupied territories. The Associated Press reported that the church had previously rejected a divestment proposal at the last national meeting 2 years ago amid fears that the resolution would be considered anti-Jewish. Why not? Because of fears that it wouldn't be right. Yet Liberty Counsel's Staver said the Mennonite Church missed the mark. Oh, yes, they did. On one hand, it purports to oppose anti-Semitism, but on the other hand, it supports anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic divestment in what it calls, erroneously calls, occupied territories, you see. So we got double talk, double-mindedness, and lukewarmness. Israel is the only free and democratic country in the Middle East. Israel has more legitimate and historical rights to its land than any other country in the world. Israel is thousands of years old. Jews have lived in the land for millennia. Further, Staver said that the founder and the leaders of the BDS movement and all the churches that follow in its footsteps are clear in their intent. They want to destroy Israel. So I have a question to ask the Mennonite Church USA, and I know because I've spoke to some Mennonites recently, many of them are upset about what's going on at the top. But they don't know what to do about it. The divestment resolution is both anti-Semitic and unwise. Israel is a leader in the economy and a world leader in technology, business, agriculture, and more, he said. Divesting in Israel will only harm those who divest. Mennonite Church USA, which has 75,000 members, has joined. How do you have $3 billion in your coffers? No, there's more than 70. Surely there's more than 75,000. probably more like 750,000, has now joined the ranks of other churches who have passed resolutions to divest economically from Israel in what they call their quest to bring justice to the Palestinians, to the Mennonites. Any Mennonite who's listening to this, do you know what the word Palestinian came from? The Romans replaced the name Israel or Judah with Palestine for the sole purpose of hopefully removing the name of Israel from everyone's vocabulary forever. But you didn't know that, did you? Palestine is another word, or is Philistine. And so when you choose the Palestinians, the Philistines, over Israel, you are choosing the murderers, the terrorists, the enemies of Israel over Israel's Messiah. The resolution read that the Mennonites received part of their inspiration from the Palestinian church Christians, including Kairos Palestine. The Kairos Palestine document, which was launched in Bethlehem in 2009, is a word of faith, hope, and love from the heart of Palestinian suffering, according to its full title, yet it has been criticized as a document that is blatantly anti-Semitic and completely avoiding the Israeli narrative of the Middle East conflict. Now, so this brings me to message to the church in Laodicea. How many $1 billion? The Mennonite Church USA $3 billion Everence Church Fund. You guys are no different than those folks over there at the Vatican, collecting money and hoarding it to yourselves. How far have you turned from the truth? When your forefathers experienced pain and suffering along with the Jews, were accused of being Jews, are they not going to be are not the enemies of them going to be repaid? Of course they are. They were in fact the followers of Yehoshua. They weren't afraid to use the name Yehoshua, but you are. They weren't afraid to recognize the Sabbath over Sunday, but you are. On one hand, you claim to be a friend of Israel, and on the other hand, your words are in opposition. Let's go to Revelation. Okay, message to the church in Laodicea. And to the angel of the church of the Laodiceans write, these things says the word is not amen. I will get to that later. The faithful and true witness, the beginning of the creation of Jehovah. I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. Yes, on one side you claim you are, and on the other side you claim you're not, which means you're neither. So then, because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew you out of my mouth. You will be rejected. Because you say, I am rich and increase with goods. $3 billion? Seriously, folks? Let me see something here. Let me look up something. Um, okay. Wow. I can hardly believe it myself. The Mennonite Church USA is an Anabaptist Christian denomination in the United States, although the organization is a recent 2002 merger of the Mennonite Church and the General Conference Mennonite Church. The body has its roots in the Radical Reformation. Yeah, I know that. The total membership of the Mennonite Church USA denominations decreased from 133,000 before the merger in 1998 to a total of 120,000 in the Mennonite Church USA in 2001. And in 2013, membership has fallen to 9,737 members and 839 congregations. And in 2016, it had fallen to 78. So I guess there's a bunch of Mennonites who did not approve of this kind of nonsense coming from the Mennonite Church USA headquarters. $3 billion? How is this possible? How do you collect $3 billion from this small group of people? That makes no sense. What do you have for your little emblem? Is that an olive branch? Is that what that is? Some olive branch that is. Now, I guess worldwide, oh, in 2000, wait a minute, not worldwide, 2018, the numbers have reduced to 69,000, and the congregation has reduced to 625. You folks at Mennonite Church USA, why do you think that's happening? Hmm? You've turned away from the truth. You've turned away from your forefathers who died at the hands of those you are embracing. You didn't think that after the video I did yesterday that I was not going to let this slide, do you? What I was pointing out yesterday was that your forefathers were on the right track. But all three, the Mennonites, the Amish, and the Hutterites, have slipped away from the truth. It is extremely unfortunate. Now, there is a small group of Mennonite, Amish, and Hutterites that are coming together to try to undo what has been done, to try to go back to the ways of their forefathers, the Anabaptists, the Waldensians, who were Sabbath keepers, who were friends of the Jews, at least not their enemy. I'll see if I can find it. This is on the Jerusalem Post again, and I've gone over this years ago, but it's worthwhile mentioning it again. So while you have the main group of the Mennonite falling headlong into the curse of Constantinism, this, the title is Amish Leaders' Burden to Reconcile with the Jewish People. Yes, it is their burden to reconcile with the Jewish people. And this is, 2000, May 1st, 2011. Last year, a delegation of 45 Amish community members from the United States and Switzerland paid an unusual visit to Jerusalem to present to Israel government and rabbinic leaders a declaration of repentance for the movement's historic disregard for the Jewish people and its silence during the Holocaust. Led by the community elder Bishop Ben Girard, the group shed the traditional Amish rejections of modern transportation in order to make the visit and offered a statement of contrition and of support for modern Israel, handwritten in calligraphy on a special parchment. The declaration is considered by Girard the most important document issued by his church in some 300 years, and rightly so. The Amish came out of a pietistic Protestant movement known as the Anabaptist rebaptizers, which arose in Central Europe during the Reformation and also included the Mennonites and Hutterites. These religious communities were persecuted by the larger established churches for their faith and their application of believers' baptism rather than reliant on infant baptism. And it was also because of their refusal to take part in the Sunday worship, and they were called Jews as a result. And Martin Luther ordered their executions as a result. Many of their numbers emigrated to America in the 19th and 20th centuries due to, not only that, the 18th century too, due to its greater respect for religious liberties. Today, there are an estimated 250,000 Amish in several rural communities scattered through the U.S., with some New Order Amish more amenable to modern technology while preserving the movement's separated communal lifestyle and high moral standards. Born in Indiana in 1944, Girard grew up as a conservative Amish in a conservative Amish congregation near Bowling Green, Missouri. In 1981, he had a dramatic encounter with, as they say, God, which radically changed his life. He received the baptism of the Holy Spirit, began challenging his fellow Amish to open up to mainstream evangelical move in our day, including the growing phenomenon of support, Christian support for Israel. Yeah. He basically experienced the same thing that my dad did, although my dad was never a preacher. You see, it was from my dad that I learned these things. And when you grow up and as a young adult start talking about these things to people, you encounter a lot of opposition. And some of them almost militant opposition today. Literally, threat of gun violence. Girard has written in this experience in his book, Baptized by Fire, the Gethsemane Way, but his message met resistance from more traditional elements within the church. Can you guess why? It's not hard. Today, he is an elder of an Amish community near Bonners Ferry, Idaho, in which he also heads a ministry of Anabaptist connections, working to heal and reconcile historic wounds and divisions shaped from the past traumas in the Amish and Mennonite movements. The declaration submitted by Girard and his fellow travelers asked forgiveness for the movement's historic acceptance of replacement theology. What have I been speaking against these years that I've been doing these YouTube videos? Replacement theology. Replacement theology is the rejection of Israel and the rejection of Israel's Messiah, Yehoshua, the Messiah, for a false Messiah. That's what replacement theology is. Replacing everything from Sabbath and changing it to Sunday, replacing the name of the Messiah from a Hebrew name to a Greek name, replacing the holy days to pagan idolatry days, replacing everything that was true to everything that is false. That's what replacement theology is. So, so the declaration submitted by Girard and his fellow travelers asked forgiveness for the movement's historic acceptance of replacement theology. So replacement theology is Constantine theology. It's Constantinism. So what Mr. Girard is pointing out is that the Amish, the Mennonite, and the Hutterite in the past had accepted replacement theology, Constantinism. But it was once not so. In the early days, they rejected it. But they slipped. They slipped into Constantinism, replacement theology. And for our collective sin of pride and selfishness by ignoring the plight of the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. The document also states that the Amish will now bless and speak out strongly in support of Israel and the Jewish people, and I dare say, like they used to in the Anabaptist days. Girard says the Amish movement, beginning with Jacob Ammon or Ammon, had its emphasis on outward mode of worship, a serious deviation from the original waters in which our early Anabaptist forefathers drank. Because we have lost the fire of evangelism, we have become the quiet in the land today. And even though, why? I'll tell you why. Fear of persecution. Even though we are internationally esteemed for our beautiful craftsmanship, we have become spiritually ineffective. What did I just read out of Revelation 3? Lukewarm. So the question is asked, what is the history of the Amish movement's interaction with the Jewish people of Europe and then America? Were your predecessors' attitudes of theology philo-Semitic or adverse? So he answers, to my knowledge, there has been historically been no Amish-Jewish interactions. The Amish have rooted in their belief system a deep-seated anti-Jewish attitude, which may not always be verbally expressed, but it will be found if one searches it out. That is true. That's absolutely true. My dad explained that to me. Even though you Amish have Jewish DNA in you, I have proven it. I have proven it, taking my own DNA and getting it analyzed by ftdna.com. And you know what they found? They found that I have at least 5% Sephardic Jew in my DNA, and that there are on the patrilineal side, Ashkenazi roots. You see, going to the Ashkenazi roots go to the 6th to the 8th generation, which is far away. I understand that. But in the admixture, it shows at least 5% Sephardic Jew. And I have seen other ex-Amish go and take their DNA tests, and they came up with much the same thing. Many of them a whole lot more than me. So if you hate the Jews, you hate yourself. Amish and Mennonites. Okay. But see, folks, this has not always been the case. When the Anabaptists were Sabbath keepers, they were not haters of the Jews. It was when they switched to Constantinism, when they switched to replacement theology, then they became enemies of the Jews. So you thought that after yesterday's video that I was just going to let this thing slide? No, I'm not going to let it slide. I'm going to call it as it is. All right. So the question is asked, some of the small Protestant movements which emigrated from Europe to America, such as the Pilgrims, identified with the Jewish people as a fellow persecuted minority and adopted the ancient Israelite concept of a covenant community. Was this the case with the Amish as well? His answer is no, not at all. Did the Amish study their Bibles in Hebrew in that era, as did the Pilgrims? No, the Amish never studied the Hebrew language. Why did your branch of the Amish movement issue a declaration of repentance on your recent visit to Israel? And when and why did your reconciliation efforts with the Jews start? So he answers, this has been a personal matter with me. After having encountered, as he says, the Lord, you don't encounter the Lord, because the Lord is an incorrect name for either Jehovah or Yehoshua. But anyway, I will continue. In 1981, I eventually discovered our serious error regarding our anti-Jewish attitudes, after which I carried for many years this burden, not knowing nor understanding why I was given this burden, especially after seeing that I could not find any Amish nor Mennonites who would share my views. No, you couldn't, because they were kicked out or they left. People like my dad and their children like me. There are many of us, Mr. Girod. Not just a few. When I finally took this leap of faith in January of 2010 to assemble a group of Anabaptists to go to Israel on a repentance mission, I was showered with divine favor in not only having others prepare the connections for us in Israel and in Jerusalem, but as he says, God opened my eyes to numerous individuals among both the Amish and the Mennonite. Well, Shazam, of course. Because many among the Amish and Mennonite and former Amish and Mennonite do not agree with the anti-Semitic views, the Constantinism that their religion has slipped into. Individuals among both Amish and Mennonites who carried the same vision, some of whom carried the same burden. Yeah. And as I pointed out in my previous video, there's no way. There's no way. Even though they would accept me, the Amish would, there's no way I'm going back to that religion. No way. Now, this Jerusalem Post keeps. So how important is this change in position to your particular following, and how is it being received in the wider Amish movement? His answer is, it is so important that without the Amish nation, it will be a risk for God's judgment on them. Well, that's correct. There is an awareness being spread abroad of our wrong Jewish attitudes. The scene is changing, albeit slowly. How pervasive is this awakening to the biblical Zionism within the broader Anabaptist movement? Answer: it has enough influence to inflame the outspoken anti-Jewish proponents, which only serves to give this awakening more fuel where many are taking a closer look at it. Question: does your support for Israel include recognition of the enduring nature of the land promised to Abraham and his descendants? His answer is the two cannot be separated. He is absolutely 100% right. The land in Israel may not be separated from each other because that is the new covenant, you see. I'll continue. Question: do you support Israel's right to self-defense? If so, how does that reconcile with the traditional pacifism of the Amish movement? So his answer was the original Anabaptist position was non-resistance, not pacifism. A big difference when defined correctly. Yes, I support Israel's right to defend itself, and I declare here today, myself, that I also support unequivocally Israel's right to defend itself. In other words, Israel has more right to defend itself today than any other nation in the world. That's my belief system, okay? So the question, here's another question. In the Mennonite community, or some in the Mennonite community, have veered away into very liberal positions and social activism, including pro-Palestinian advocacy and even dialoguing with figures like Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. What is your views on these trends? He says this is extremely disturbing, for it reveals just how far we have fallen from the perspective of Jehovah's perspective on the whole issue concerning the promise coming through Abraham for our day. This guy understands it. He does. And I will finish this and I will give you my final thoughts. To deny the Jews is in essence denying the promise. What have I been saying? To deny the Jews is in essence denying promise. What is the promise? The new covenant. He should have said denying the new covenant. You folks who understand this, you need to come out stronger. Call it as it is. It's not just denying the promise, it's denying the new covenant and rejecting the new covenant. Sometimes the liberal Mennonites, have been blinded to resulting in their arrogant support for the terrorists. Many mainline Protestant denominations are now divided among liberal and conservative, evangelical wing, with the former usually being more pro-Palestinian and the latter being more pro-Israel. Yes, folks, the divisions are happening as we speak. The goats and the sheep being divided, if you know what I mean. This is the question. Are the same dynamics at work in the Anabaptist movement? And the Amish fellow says, shockingly, yes. So the question is asked, how do you see the future of Amish movement evolving? The question would require, he says, the question would require a book to fully answer it. Suffice it to say, however, that the future of the Amish, inclusive with the Mennonites, looks more promising than at any time in recent generation. An awareness of our fallen state blankets the whole Anabaptist nation these days, causing many to review our past and how it is affecting our actions today. This will now also include our Jewish connections. He's right. Now, as I pointed out concerning the DNA testing, as you see, how he is saying is that the Anabaptist groups are now becoming divided, liberal versus conservative, just like the rest of the country is. Okay, and it's almost like half and half, I would say. So when I go and look at some of these DNA websites, for example, like ancestry.com, there's hundreds, maybe even 1,000 of my cousins who took DNA. Why is it that the Anabaptists are now taking DNA? What's the story here? Is it because of the fact that some of the forefathers whispered in the ear, "We have Jewish ancestry. We have Jewish ancestry. We might be Jews." Is that the reason? Well, that's what happened to me. That's what happened to my cousins. Yes, it was whispered in their ears by their parents. So, like many of them, I was determined to find out the truth. And when I tried on ancestry.com, I didn't find any. Not with them, but I found out that half of my cousins had Jewish ancestry. Then I found out that ancestry.com and a lot of other DNA websites don't check Sephardic Jewish ancestry. Well, how do you not check Sephardic Jewish ancestry? FTDNA.com does. And when I check with FTDNA.com, guess what shows up? You see, at least 5% Sephardic Jew. What I'm saying is, when the forefathers whispered, "We have Jewish ancestry, we have Jewish," well, where did that come from? I'll tell you where it came from. It came from a friendship and affinity to the Jews. In fact, folks, as one of my Swiss cousins who lives in Switzerland today told me, you see, I don't know much about Switzerland history, but he does. He told me that when the charming Polly left Europe, that the Swiss government, when they found out that the Amish were leaving Switzerland or were leaving Europe, they made sure they rounded up as many Jews as they could find, along with other undesirables, and made sure that they were loaded on the same ship headed to the New World. Well, did the Anabaptists go and throw the Jews off the ship? No, they didn't. In fact, there was at least a couple of orphans, Jewish orphans, that were loaded on that ship. Yes. And some of them are in my ancestry or in the ancestry of my cousins. You see, the Anabaptists in those days took the Jews in. You see, made sure they stayed alive. You see, what happened? What happened to the Mennonites? What happened to the Amish? What happened to you Hutterites? What happened? You slipped away. You don't want to suffer the consequences of Revelation 3, verses 15 through 19. Haven't your forefathers suffered enough? Why would you want to go through that again?